Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 76th episode of By-The-Bywater. It is good to be back with you all, and boy, have we got all kinds of personal news. Jared, you're not getting some awards, but you're nominated for other awards. What's your current status of things now?
So, I did not win the Locust Award for Best Novel, but I was nominated. Always an honor.
We will kill.
They will pay. Looking at the list, there were some really heavy hitters on there. It was it felt like a long shot in some ways. But genuinely so happy to even be nominated, because now I can put that in my bio, be like, hey, how many other people can say they were Logan? But the other piece of news is the West Passage was shortlisted for the Le Guin Prize, which is a huge deal.
Yeah, massive. Was that established after the prize itself was established after her passing? Was that the idea?
Yeah, so the foundation that her kids set up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a ton of the history of the word, actually, but either she wanted this to be her legacy or they decided it would be a good legacy for her. Mm-hmm. So they established the Le Guin Prize to honor, I think this is the third or fourth year that it's been awarded, and it's to honor basically literature kind of on the fringes in a way, which, being published with Tor isn't exactly on the fringes, but it's honoring fiction that is able to imagine alternatives in a way, not the solution to the problem is killing something, but the solution to the problem may just be a committee meeting or whatever.
That's good.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, again, a list with a lot of, it's a very stacked list this year. Frickin' Rakesfall is on this list, which is oh God. If I beat Rakesfall, that's a worthy opponent situation. I'm going to be so honored and very surprised. But
well, we'll throw in links to the nomination list and to Rakesfall as well, in particular, in our show notes too.
It's a fantastic book.
Great stuff. Add to your reading list, folks. We assume you've all read the West Passage by now. Now to read some of the other stuff. Meantime, speaking of other things going on, Oriana, you had your first screening as such, and you've got your first formal film festival screening coming up, correct?
Yeah, we just did a little cast and crew screening, but it was really nice to actually watch Sight Unseen on a big screen with a group of people, some of whom we did not know because, cast and crew brought friends, family with them, and I was very pleased that some of the big scares actually worked. I knew, they will, but hearing people scream in the theater is great. Love that, hearing laughter, because it is, it's not a comedy, but there are funny moments, funny lines of dialogue. And so we will be having our world premiere at the Maine International Film Festival on my birthday, July 19th, 9 p.m. We have another screening the next day, July 20th at 3 p.m. You can actually, if any of our listeners are in the Maine area in New England and want to head up to Waterville, Maine, God bless. We would love to have you. Let me know if you are coming up via socials, because that would be really cool.
Yeah, and spread the word to anyone you might know there. I can speak for Jared that both of us have seen the film ourselves, as we were happy Kickstarter backers. We're even in the credits, we can confirm it's a really, really lovely film. Wonderful, wonderful work, and we will continue saying that. So praise all around. As for me, I feel like the runt in the litter in this news report, but in a good way.
What are you up to, Ned?
You're only a celebrated music writer.
Well, it's because of that I'm in things. Basically, I've spent the last few weeks recording all sorts of guest podcast appearances for other things. That includes I'll throw in links. One was a podcast on the group Suede, who I've been a fan of for a long time. The author Melissa Locker, who is about to release her book And After All, which is subtitled A Fan History of Oasis, interviewed me for that since I ran an Oasis mailing list back in the 90s, and she interviewed me for an adjacent podcast that'll be on early internet music fandom and what involved with that back in the 90s, which is its own tale to tell, especially pre-social media. And then there's another one that the musician Randy Randall interviewed me for. And yeah, I don't know. I seem to be on a roll. That and writing and other things like that. Point being, we've all been busy in a good way, and that's a good thing. We'll take that. Given the state of the world, we'll take that. So, and as we move on from there, so celebrate the wins where you find them. Anyway, let's get into talking about some news. It means it's time for Jared. So please, once again, take it away.
A few little things to note this time out, but getting the if we must ones out of the way first. There's a bit of Rings of Power casting news. 3 UK actors, Andrew Richardson, Zubin Varla, and Adam Young, have been announced for the 3rd season, with Richardson being a regular and the other 2 as recurring roles. Meantime, Embracer, the entertainment and rights conglomerate that bought the Saul Zaentz founded Middle-earth Enterprises a while back, has reorganized and renamed itself Fellowship Entertainment, so they know where their bread is buttered. More of interest are a couple of recent pieces worth reading. In Current Affairs, Alex Skopic's How the Right Abuses Tolkien is a solid overview of just that, with a particular focus on the business conniving from the likes of Peter Thiel and others that we touched on in our Silicon Valley episode the other year. Meantime, in an enjoyable personal essay shared on LitHub, Tolkien's grandson Simon, who besides helping oversee the estate in recent times, has also been writing his own novels for a couple of decades, touched on both his grandfather's general inspiration to him as a writer, as well as some delightful personal memories of him from his youth. To quote one part, "I first read Lord of the Rings aged 9 and pestered him with questions about the Blue Wizards and the Drowned Lands in the West while he tried to eat his lunch in the Miramar Hotel." And we'll have links to both of these in our show notes.
I do like that image. I mean, I'm assuming that Simon wasn't one of those nasty kids who just sort of like eager and all that, and Tolkien's sort of like, I just want to finish my sandwich, please.
I want to know what was the answer?
he eating?
Like the Blue Wizard question. What was?
Yeah.
Well, also, what was Tolkien eating?
Still,
Like, was it soup? Was it
Yeah.
a sandwich?
Yeah, some other thing there, some sort of hearty fare. I do like that story because it is a reminder. It just sort of hit me, and just thinking about it the other day, it's like, we talk about Tolkien as an author of the past and so forth, and yet, there are people alive now who still have him in living memory. He's not that far removed from us in a weird sort of way, which is on the one hand true, on the other hand sort of like, oh yeah, he was here, he did that, etc., and things like this, and we could still get these new insights into him, even in an indirect way. And even if most of the people now who would have such memories would be like younger members of the family or people who met him when very young, of course, I'm the only one who theoretically could have met him, but as a baby, when he died, it wouldn't have been much. So there's that. And yeah, it's nice to see, thinking on that current affairs piece, it's nice to see more pushback, I think, against this claiming of Tolkien by the right, which is rather necessary.
I'm not going to say we did it first, but because I'm sure other people didn't, wrote about it or talked about it publicly, but everyone should listen to our episode about it because I think it was really good.
Yes.
Leading the charge, or trendsetters.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing names like Palantir and Valar Enterprises and other things like that drop up in recent news, just sort of like, ugh, Google search that if you want to be depressed.
I think a connection of mine on LinkedIn, I'm so sorry, talking about joining Andril, and it's just like, I have to get off of LinkedIn.
If you can go in and turn it into Narsil and break it, sure.
Right.
But let's extend that metaphor. But and as for the Embracer and the Rings of Power news, nice, fine. So let us move on. Nothing more to add.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it's been done and gone. So let's go on ahead and just take our plunge into the main topic for this time out. The choice of topic was mine, and so I will begin. When it comes to the sweeping narrative of The Lord of the Rings, by default, not everything and anything in it can be explicitly considered of equal importance and focus. Such is the case with nearly any long narrative, whatever the form. Adaptations from one medium to another can help distill this even further, so it's a little surprise that for those who have primarily seen Peter Jackson's films, 2 Middle-earth realms in particular would be essentially unknown to them. In the Return of the King film, Gandalf describes the Lord of the Nazgûl as the Witch King of Angmar, but offers no further explanation or clarification as to what that means. Angmar itself is never mentioned again. Separately, another place name from the book, Arnor, never once comes up in any of the films. The fact that said films worked and were successes as they were gives a sense as how truly central both terms are to the core story as such. They're not. And indeed, if one reads the book, you'll discover that neither of them in fact exist as anything like an organized nation or the equivalent at the time of the narrative. both of them having been gone for over a millennia. They are, in quite literal senses, just names on the Middle-earth map, relics of what once was. Yet in very particular ways, their shadows have a long cast on the story as a whole, as well as on numerous characters and their own often unspoken motivations. Both of these lands were, in his often typical style, essentially discovered by Tolkien in the writing of the book's manuscripts. Per Christopher Tolkien's note on a key source text for the appendices, The Heirs of Elendil, as published and discussed in The Peoples of Middle-earth, there's no exact timing to be made for what essentially became the canonical forms of these lands in the story, though various waves of composition can be deduced. To simplify a complex story, various general thoughts about the history of what was originally called the North Kingdom of the Dunedain, separate from the South Kingdom of Gondor, eventually became formalized into the story of the realm of Arnor, occupying a large swath of the region of Eriador, including what would later be known as the Shire, as well as Bree and many of the lands on the way to Rivendell. Meanwhile, an oppositional realm, Angmar, was described as coalescing in the northernmost reaches of the Misty Mountains, seen eventually to be led by, indeed, the Lord of the Nazgûl, as part of the defeated but not destroyed Sauron's long-term revenge against the societies of men that had caused his downfall at the end of the Second Age. Eventually, this developed into the story of a centuries-long conflict, which resulted first in Arnor's dissolution, divided into 3 smaller kingdoms conquered and destroyed one by one, and then Angmar's, following the arrival of an army from Gondor soon after the last remnant of Arnor, Arthedain, fell. By the time of The Lord of the Rings, aside from the Shire, itself essentially a legacy created by the lost dynasty of Arnor via Arthedain, only ruins of Arnor's and Angmar's chief cities exist, and they are never visited in the text. It's very much worth noting that in creating these more detailed backstories, Tolkien did not suddenly go back and wholly create a swath of new material to include in the core story he had told. Instead, as Christopher Tolkien's studies of the overall manuscript showed, often what had been general or partially isolated elements in the text were essentially given a new specific focus by this constructed history. 2 examples, for instance, were providing a bit more detail in Merry's speech after escaping the Barrow-wight, and the sense of a past life suddenly intruding into his, as well as more detail via Aragorn about the fortifications on and near Weathertop and their exact origins when he and the hobbits arrived there en route to Rivendell. In all these and other cases, what's more important than the emergence of more specific names in the final versions of the story is the sense of deep history in the story's present moment, where past monuments by unknown creators, references to long-lost kingdoms and haunted ruins, and the sense of so much vast natural space that is simultaneously, perhaps more so to the modern mind reading the story, both unsettled and unsettling. 2 thoughts to offer before we enter our general discussion. First, in a real sense, Tolkien, perhaps as part of his dream of a mythology for England, touched upon some of the deepest and oldest stories and folk tales that have survived in that context. Whether it be Stonehenge, the persistence of surviving elements of urban ruins and towns, or much more besides, the idea that something has happened before, sometimes seemingly without any plausible or obvious explanation, hangs heavy in such stories. In the world of Middle-earth at the time of The Lord of the Rings, whether it be the fearful mention of Dead Men's Dyke by Barlam and Buttermere, or the vague references by the Shire hobbits to the King in various contexts, divorced from any real meaning across centuries of time, parallels can easily be found in any number of creative impulses well beyond literature as such in the English popular imagination, as much as parallels can and do exist in any number of other societies. The second thought is to consider how Aragorn, in essence, is the closest thing to the legacy of both Arnor and Angmar to be found in the text. As has often been noted, Aragorn's full background and potential driving forces are not included in the main narrative, but spelled out instead in more detail in the appendices. Among other things, it's there that we learn that, for all of his fostering and care thanks to Elrond when he was young, Aragorn grew up with the knowledge of himself as an heir to a small remnant of people, with no known fixed home spoken of or portrayed outside of generalities, living in a land haunted by the presences of the past. Angmar's long-distant fall would simply be of cold comfort given the toll it took, and both his father's violent death when he himself was only 2, and his mother's evident battles with both her people's state and her own plainly spoken sense of depression and helplessness give a sense as to what he sometimes struggled with in the text, however understatedly or unspoken. But there's more that can be said about Arnor and Angmar and the like in general, so it's time to open up the floor. And where to begin? I don't really know of any particular starting point, really. It's just one of those things that, as I said, the idea of sort of like, what are these realms and how do they function and what other parallels within Tolkien and without? Does anybody have something they'd like to start with, really?
Well, as usual, I'm kind of going to go with how does my own experience sort of relate, shape my feelings and understanding of this material. And I think the thing that first sort of stands out to me is how kind of difficult it is for me as someone born and raised in America, which is a pretty new, like in its current form, like has not existed for all that long, and the people who had been here for so long before did not leave the exact same type of infrastructure leave it behind. They're still here, but the remnants of quote unquote lost civilizations are like, it's not the same as it is in England or continental Europe or other places on this earth. And so Tolkien's experience of living amongst sort of Roman ruins and pre-Roman ruins, we just have a lot fewer of those kinds of pieces of infrastructure. I just didn't encounter them a whole lot growing up in Florida because you can't build anything permanent in Florida. And so, actually going to Britain and visiting and seeing the examples of this, this type of stuff that's been standing for 5,000 years, really helped me understand, the lost realm of Arnor kind of a lot better. Because there's like whole capital cities that are just gone. It's like 100 miles from the Shire to a Numinous. I don't know. I'm saying it wrong. But like we don't visit. We just kind of, do we even hear about it, or is it just kind of mentioned on the map?
It's mentioned briefly when somebody, I know for sure somebody mentions the Scepter of Anubis.
Yes.
But the city itself, I think it's mentioned in there somewhere, but like,
it's not,
it's not a big deal.
Major thing. And yet it was this, major capital city of this civilization, which I find fascinating.
It's been so long since I've actually read any of the material about Arnor and stuff that I had forgotten or didn't realize how the Rome of it all, like the Northern Kingdom being analogous to the Western Roman Empire, which I don't know how much you can really draw from those parallels, but I was just like, yeah, of course, like
yeah, there's a definite sense of how that can work, and you don't want to one-to-oneing it is always a little tricky, but there is that feeling of that sense of, just trying to reinterpret what's there, and there are many different directions to go with that. I think some of the things that I find interesting about it is how it's one of those things that fan work, shall we say, attempts to fill a perceived void. Is kind of what I think a lot of the reaction is to that. This, in part, you could argue, is also a reflection of how the dotting every I, crossing every T that we've seen with various transmedia things. I'm sure we can all name a few franchises, and there are many more along the way, where we have plenty of examples of that. It's sort of like, if something is mentioned, it must be explained, type thing. That's whereas when Tolkien presents Lord of the Rings, and we have touched on this point before. I remember we talked about it, and we talked about a certain Terry Brooks book where everything on that map was visited, whereas in Lord of the Rings, there's plenty that is not. As I kind of mentioned at the end of the previous episode, there are these fringe places, there are these locations that are noted, but we're never there, and we never hear about anybody who might still be there, if there is anybody at all. Or it's just simply a name on a map. We can tie into questions of cartography and other things like that as we have before. I'll loop back to more of the fan work stuff in a bit, because I do think it's interesting, because precisely it is such a blank slate that people have used it to fill in all sorts of things, sometimes very bizarrely, I've noted. But maybe to touch more on what Oriana was saying about the conceptual sense of it all. Yeah, that sense of deep history of something that was there, and it's sort of, I find the moment where and I mentioned this, where Mary brings that history fully into the text. It's such a wonderfully outre spooky moment, precisely because it's one of those classic examples. Think of the talking fox earlier in the Shire as a very light version of that, where suddenly we get something that comes out of nowhere and just goes away. We never get anything like it again, and that makes it all the more fascinating. This sense that is it the spirit of who was originally there haunting him? Is it somebody? Is it because of what he's wearing that he gets this strange connection to the past? Aren't the men as we learn, the more we learn of the Legendarian, aren't the men supposed to leave, the Middle Earth completely, and their spirits go beyond? Why would they still be hanging around? Of course, we do have, the down south and the Black Mountain and the dead down there. So it's not like this is not completely out of place, but still, it's this very weird sense of history suddenly echoing in, and Mary is not merely describing I feel like I've seen these before. He suddenly is this person. He suddenly is this anonymous warrior fighting the men of Carn Dûm, the capital of Angmar, and literally a memory of him dying violently. It's one of those things geez, there's your intrusion of the past into the present in a very vivid and striking way.
Yeah, what am I trying to say? The layers of history that overlap at every point of the journey is so fascinating. Angmar didn't really get that far south in terms of territory, but they were able to dispatch evil spirits and pollute the land and stuff. And it's a kind of in a way, it's a vision of what will happen if Sauron gets the ring, I think, where it's this is, you can't even trust some old bones anymore. And also, I think maybe hopeful in that, it's going to take a while to get rid of this stuff, but, they can be eventually. Yeah. If you have Tom Bombadil with you, I guess.
Put Tom Bombadil in charge and everything will be fine. King Tom.
I like how he has his own living memory moment, again with the barrow when he picks out the brooch. And he gets that far away look, and he says, "Here's somebody who wore this." And you're almost like, do you maybe know or see, observe? It's one of those things that's hard to say. But since the sense is too that the false road that the hobbits see turned out to be described as a border, and the presumption, and this is something that hey, Fonstad, as we talked about last episode, she spells it out. It's not really spelled on the text, but the assumption, given the breakdown of the kingdoms, was that this was a border of Cardaland, so that the Barrow-wites' locations are actually near a previous borderland. And let's face it, if you're setting up an actual physical border like that, you're scared of something. And is it sort of is it suggesting civil war that was pretty intense with Arthedain, who was be the neighboring kingdom at that point? Is it because of fear of what might be coming over? It's hard to say. And again, you get the sense of so much that and so much of this kingdom, this lost kingdom, is literally nothing but death. I mean, Fornos, the other capital, is Dead Man's Dyke. It's like you basically where you went to go to die. Essentially, is what it sounds like a literal civilization.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that the sort of northern kingdom was the one that Elendil came to. It was historically, even before that, the people who moved there from Númenor tended to be more elf-friendly, as opposed to Gondor, where the people who populated the southern regions of Middle Earth who came from Númenor tended to be kingsmen. So this is supposed to be the where the good people are, or the people who and boy, it falls apart I guess not that quickly in the grand scheme of it, but it feels kind of quickly that they just kind of fall apart. All of a sudden we've got 3 sons that decide they each want their own kingdom. It's what? No, what are you guys doing? It's not that long into the second age when this is happening. It kind of this is the third age. So it's okay. Númenor, right? I guess. Kind of, but it is just oh wow, men just can't help themselves, can they?
No.
Yeah, I was really struck this time around looking at Arnor is theoretically the more important realm because that's where the High King sits. That's the realm of the Elder Son.
Yep.
But it's depopulated almost instantly. It's never very strong. It's just a ceremonial thing it feels like for most of his existence, it's just a name.
Yeah.
It's not an actual realm, just kind of like a name on a map that occasionally has an army attached to it. which is so interesting. I feel like that makes it feel very realistic to me in a way, whereas a lesser author might be like, yeah, this is where the High King sits. It's the most important place in the whole area. This is the strongest city, and it's like, no, this is just kind of like part of England where nobody lives. It's not,
right, yeah.
It's not cool or important.
I mean, it's also interesting too when you think about what the location is, where Tolkien put it. Again, let's be fair here. Let's say he's doing this as an afterthought. Okay, fine, maybe he is, but Annúminas is located. It's on the shores of a lake. That's logical, but it's like tucked up and away. You'd expect it to be something like further down at a particular crossroads, of which we know there are many, or a particular ford or site or things like this. You'd almost think that a city like that would be somewhere on the Great Road, as opposed to, being in its own particular location. And, considering geographically where it is, it's almost like it's oriented towards the north, where there's almost nothing beyond there. It's a very sort of different viewpoint for something like Minas Tirith, how we see it, and the cities that were down there, which is a little more centrally located, etc. And it is remarkable that it could speak to things like, the reflection of coexistence, where you've got the Havens, you've got Rivendell, you've got, dwarves in the Blue Mountains. It's sort of like, and again, down in Moria, at that time, Moria is still going and thriving. So, pretty much everybody's like, we're here, we've got Arnor. Yay. Everything's sort of like a little second guessing, maybe. But maybe, the touching on the depopulation part, I think, is interesting, because it's interesting how much Tolkien puts into, and again, you can also say this is a little bit retconning, how disastrous the Gladden Field disaster was. I mean, he eventually writes about it in a piece that ends up in the Unfinished Tales. And you get a sense that that's meant to be a real body blow to essentially the whole population of Arnor. And I'm like, damn, if you lose one army and it's already that bad, what is left? Again, he can't maybe sketch out everything that there is to sketch out about Arnor, because it's sort of like, again, gets back to the point of relevance. Is it truly relevant? Not really.
Yeah.
But it's that impact, and why I think talking about it through the lens of Aragorn is really interesting, because you get a sense that this is somebody who is sort of like, I'm an heir to a really not much of a kingdom, honestly,
Yeah, he has to take up residence in Gondor. Like, he's not like immediately rebuilding Annúminas. Like,
that's he has to reclaim the throne of Gondor for any sort of legitimacy, which it feels backwards if you're looking at like legally what should be happening, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's where the power is.
Especially because, Ned, like you were saying, there is not any, like, now that, Angmar isn't a thing, there is nothing in the north. It doesn't seem like a lot of arable land, and it's just nothing there. There's nothing for you here, only death. Like,
I mean, it's interesting thinking about it now, is that we do have the moment in the text in Winmer and Bree, where besides Sauron's spies and things like that, you do have people who apparently are coming up from the south because they're trying to get away from things. So you get a sense that there is a sort of like a new settling of certain kind of population movement, very, very light, maybe, fleeing essentially what was already building up to be just a really nasty, Gondor, Mordor, things are already looking bad. So people were coming from somewhere. So you could argue that there was sort of a new drive there. And the suggestion seems to be, after the fact, that once peace is established, Annúminas is somehow restored. How? And, and Aragorn goes to live there for part of the time, just to sort of like, I am here. And I'm like, well, okay, why not just hang around in Bree and enjoy Barlowman's beer? I don't know, man. That seems like a better option.
You've got to rebuild your power base, and
I
got to have some place to garrison or whatever.
Yeah. And again, do we need those details? No. Would Tolkien have ever written them? Maybe, if the new shadow had turned into a thing, but that seemed to be more Gondor focused anyway, so there's no way of knowing.
I think also, like, there's unless there was some sort of linguistic split that started happening, I think he probably wouldn't bother. Feels like that was sort of the driving.
Yeah.
Unless
he'd
there,
lean into that's for sure. Yeah.
real linguistic drift happening.
What's the dialect of the North Kingdom like? Let's get into it.
Right. And I do think, I do like the elements that we do get as such from the appendices, because this idea that, again, that the Dunedain become led by chieftains, it's like with the loss of the kingdoms, no one can claim they're a king anymore. It's almost sort of like a moment of recognition, like, what are we? Or when they're not even, it's a title that suggests something that is not necessarily fixed in space. You're not a lord of a land if you're not really fixed in any one location, and nothing in the appendices suggests anything beyond the fact that there are places where the Dunedain live, however much they are, but where and what and how.
Yeah, do they have little villages, seasonal villages? Like, they aren't totally just nomadic all the time, are they?
It's unclear.
I think so. Yeah, it's very unclear. I feel like there's an implication that they're kind of welcome at Rivendell whenever they want to show up for a bit, but they don't
take a shower.
They can't live there. It's their rest stop.
Just this touring band, forever. They're the Grateful Dead, just constantly touring forever.
They are just replaying their greatest hits constantly. They have nothing else to do.
Yeah, they're not creating any new culture.
No, they're literally just biding their time, it feels like, waiting for something to happen.
It's like the most we get of terms of their function, for lack of a better term, is explicitly, guardian/militaristic in the sense that, they're keeping an eye on Bree by implication.
Yeah.
There's that whole idea, talking about how that when everyone leaves the North to go down to join Aragorn, and Bartlement's sort of like, yeah, wow, we didn't know how good we had it. All of a sudden, everything around here turned really rotten. It's sort of like, okay, what'd you guys do and where were you guys? And similarly, the idea that there was that Gandalf asked them over what feels like to be at least a generation or two, keep an eye on the Shire for me. It's sort of like, well, that's an interesting power dynamic here. It's sort of like, and the fact that they're described as being like, it was a lot of hard work, but we're glad we did it, even though we weren't doing much. It's like, that's dedication, I gotta say. It's the Dunedain. Maybe it gives them a focus. Maybe there's the idea of something to do, which sounds flippant, because again, otherwise all we hear about is battling trolls and orcs and other random things out there. It seems to be something where it's sort of like, we're basically trying to survive. How we're keeping ourselves alive when we're not being attacked? Hunting.
It feels like there's gotta be this. I mean, he's not the author to do this. Right. Just because if he had been, he would have done it.
Yeah.
But there must have been some kind of bizarre cultural shift among the Dunedain, over the centuries that they don't have a home, where it's like some sort of warrior code or something arises. There has to be something like that keeps them in this sort of knight errant kind of thing, where they're just always looking for a cause. They're always looking for a cause. And unfortunately, they seem to pick the right one a lot of the time. Yeah. But I don't know. I think that would be an interesting thing to understand, sort of tell. Again, I don't think he is interested in it, but
no,
because there's a lot of cultural stasis.
Yeah, I mean, the closest we do get to any sort of sense of organization is the fact that the lineage is always, it's sort of like, it's the line of descent. We have to go line of descent. So when Arathorn dies, and Aragorn's only 2 years old, it's not like, oh, we pick a new chieftain. It's like, no, the next chieftain is Aragorn. We might have some certain stand-ins, and pretty much Gilraine, a fascinating character. She would be something I would love to really know more about, because again, we get these really just interesting hints. She's the one who clearly seems to be making the call. It's sort of like, okay, does that mean there's a particular, I don't want to say matrilineal, but very particular sort of thing going in the absence of, we do what she says.
Sort of a dowager queen.
Yeah, we can be a bit flexible with our gender roles.
Yeah.
As long as she's holding power for a man, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. if Aragorn had been a woman, we would not be having this conversation.
Well, that's one of the things that kind of gets brought up now and then in the appendices. It's like there's a king of, I think, Arthedain, who puts in a claim to the throne of Gondor because he's like something about the laws of succession of Númenor. Like, it's the eldest child, no matter what the gender is, and therefore I have the right to claim the throne. And Gondor's like, no thanks, you'd stay up there.
Yeah.
And they pick somebody who's so much less related, it feels like. But anyway, was there ever a lady ruling the Dunedain? Was that ever a thing in these long, and I'm assuming no, because it's got to be an unbroken line of descent from father to son, but also can be a second, the second child can be a son and the woman could be a child. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah. We're getting into fan fiction, or I'm getting into fan fiction territory, I think.
And more on that in a second. But the fact that Gilraine is, she's very specifically honored by everyone. I mean, the extended cut of the film, has a little bit of that, but it's, unsurprisingly, it's really more interesting and detailed in the appendices. And the sense that, she is gifted with a certain insight or power of prophecy. It seems to be one of those little sort of outcrops of that comes up from time to time in the story about a very specific form that can be done. And it just, it's just an interesting dynamic. And again, with Aragorn's, it ties into the fact that he is, again, someone who lives rough, so it's like he is not, for someone who is meant to be the chieftain, he is not somebody who has been sitting around the whole time. He clearly has been, active in doing his roles. And in fact, based on what we now know, and again, given the fact that, father died when he was 2, he was out there like wandering the world.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to ask who the stand-in chieftain was or anything like that. Again, fan fiction, but there's this idea that's sort of like, you could be the chieftain and yet you don't have to be with your tribe, if you want to call them that. And you could call them a tribe almost at this point, wandering society, however you want to define it. And again, how do they maintain, is there a purity issue? Is everyone just sort of their interbreeding thing? Yeah, we don't know.
What is the domestic situation like? They're not just like a band of 100 warriors or whatever.
Right,
like,
somebody's making the clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see them all ride up. Okay, that means they keep horses. Where and how?
Yeah.
We don't know. They have them. They didn't just they didn't order them by Amazon, so, or however much. Imagine if you could. But again, there's things that speak to things like this. They presumably have blacksmith. How do they have weapons? And et cetera, et cetera. So it's not they seem to be self-reliant in some sort of way. And again, you get further point, you're still like, okay, into fanfic we go. It's sort of like, ugh. But that leads to my other point where there is definitely a lot more fanfic, and it's a little more, and that's talking about a bit more about Angmar, because Angmar is the real blank slate. Angmar's like, oh, let's just create Mordor up here in the north.
Let's just have an
mini
evil
Mordor,
realm.
yeah.
Mordorito.
There's a vision. But I mean, I have seen at least 2 video games in the whole weird interrelated Bizarro series. Every so often I dip in and find out, okay, what are you guys claiming now?
Yeah, they love that
games?
stuff. It's so I don't want to call it weird because, go with God, go with Eru, I guess. But what?
I mean, they did Hot Shelob. Have they done Hot Witch King?
Give it time. And I mean, that name itself is also very interesting. I mean, yes, there are male witches. Duh. I get, get that.
We're not J.K. Rowling here. So.
No.
Yeah, thankfully.
Yeah, God.
It is such an interesting terminology. It's the idea of like, okay, what's going on up there? Is it sorcery? Is it some other things? Again, though, it is such a blank slate. All we know about Angmar is Carn Dûm, this thing, is located up in the northernmost mountain or the range, essentially, as more or less to be turned from the map. It's something that presumably was like set in a cave or something like that, caverns, however you want to find it.
Oh my god, now I'm picturing the Witch King of Angmar having that like Taliban compound. No, Al-Qaeda compound. The
like completely made up one that's like a mountain that's been hollowed out with tunnels, and it's like, here's the video game room or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my god, the Witch King just playing on a bootleg PlayStation or something.
I could totally believe this.
Yeah. Oh god.
Yeah. And there's no sense of, what's up there, what kind of society is this? And again, this version touches on some of the things that we have talked about before. What are the orcs? Who are they? What do they do? Presumption is that they're orcs or goblins, if you want to call it that. This is where it gets a little too, however you want to find it. The point is, they're up there and there are men up there. Who? Where? From? Locals? Did they come in? Were they brought over? Are they from Lord Erascal's original peoples? Say, we don't know. We know none of this. But because we don't know any of this, it is such a blank slate that everybody can project onto it. So I've seen descriptions like, oh, there are 6 surrounding villages that protect Carn Dûm. Again, this is one of the video games, and you have to go and like defeat them all. And I'm like, sure. Yeah,
okay.
Great.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
That doesn't really help me at all. So, it is essentially like, if you told me that Angmar was just simply the Lord of the Nazgûl and nobody else, I'd believe you because it has that feeling sometimes.
Yeah.
It just sort of sits up there. And, it is interesting as a presence, especially it must have clocked in for like, the Dunedain and everyone's else. It's like, how come we keep dying and there's still a Witch King in Angmar? What does that mean? There is at least interesting questions. Do we know know exactly what we're facing? How do we know what we're facing? There is the hint in the appendices. It's sort of like everyone starts figuring out, hey, wait a minute. Been both Arnor and Gondor. It seems like we're being attacked by all sides here constantly. What if, it's sort of like the penny drops type thing. And then it really only comes clear for, I can't remember if it was Ernil, the final king, the one who basically, Lord of the Nazgûl, confronts him saying, hey, you ran away from me after you sailed up north. I challenge you now. And then it becomes more of a Gondor thing. So it's sort of like, Angmar is sort of like, okay, Angmar happened.
Yeah.
I traded up and I'm in Minas.
Purpose.
Yeah.
I traded up and I'm in Minas Morgul now. Thank you. Type thing. That don't need it anymore. So
no more working from home for the Witch King.
Exactly.
Return to office.
New penthouse apartment. So better views. Explains so much. But it is kind of like, it's one of those things that you do get a sense. Essentially, it's sort of like having defeated the last kingdom. Sure, Gondor's army comes in. Sure, he kills all these other, defeats the armies of Angmar as such. But it's sort of like, Lord, Witch King Angmar rides off going like, I did my job. Kingdom's gone. Dunedain defeated. I'm out. I don't need to be here anymore.
Yeah. It seems like it sucks up there. I get it.
Yeah, it's like really cold, and it gets colder when he's there and all that.
Yeah.
I will say bring this up delicately. It's very intriguing how really only the evil kingdoms in Tolkien are multicultural. Like Angmar has the men and the orcs and whatever else. Mordor has the same kind of like men, orcs, and obviously it sucks for them there. But like, what's up with that?
Yeah, I feel like it's like the evil kingdoms. Bree. There's reference to like the stores being kind of living with, within the kingdom of Arnor.
Yeah, and they send the hobbits send archers to help with the final battle.
But they
against
seem to be
Angmar.
relatively separate, except in Bree where they do commingle.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And this feeds into the whole problem of orcs thing. It's not like there are good orcs living anywhere that we see. I mean, I think we're meant to understand them as there's no good.
That's an issue.
Yeah, but we could be on that all day. But it's just like I don't know. I hadn't noticed before somehow because I don't really read the appendices that often. There's a lot there. I'd rather just read them.
Yeah.
I'm a bad fan or something. I don't know.
You
but
terrible person.
Reading it, and it's like, there's orcs, there's men, there's a lot of different kinds of men. It feels like, I think trolls or whatever. There's all kinds of things living there, and it's like, okay, why is
I wonder, well, also though, I guess because we don't get a peek into whether they actually, because the orcs themselves have different cultures amongst themselves and fight constantly. What, have they sort of self-segregated within, the realm of Angmar? Is it, or are they sort of a bit more united in service of purging the land of these other kinds of men, and so they're able to kind of get along? We don't really get to see that.
Yeah, I think you're supposed to understand it as working the way Mordor works, where it's like they all have this united purpose, but they all kind of hate each other, and there's no friends in Mordor. And I'm sure if he had written something set in Angmar, it would be the same.
Yeah.
Right.
Just cold rather than hot. But it's just, I don't know. I was just like, come on, man.
No, that's
you can have other people groups. They can coexist. It's fine. I know you grew up in England where but
a little different world now. Yeah. So it would have been.
And it's not, England has always been more diverse than some of its people want to believe.
Right.
And he certainly knew that. But it's just it's just all you're capable of imagining.
It does kind of feel there's the stereotype of leftist political groups are incapable of actually uniting, whereas right-wing groups can coalesce temporarily to achieve a goal. I don't think that was consciously in Tolkien's mind while writing any of this. But
it's so funny, this is barely related, but having grown up in pretty right-wing circles, they believe the same thing. They're like, we can't we're the only group that puts our firing squads in circles. The left is so united. They're always like getting things done.
That is so funny.
And then and then I moved into the leftist circles, and it's the same. They're like, oh, the right is so organized. They've been like this, and we're always fighting. And I'm like,
human nature.
Are we like?
Applicability, not allegory, has
It
been
is
said.
the older I get, the more amazed I am that anything ever gets done or works. It's kind of wild.
Well, this is why you need a strong leader, a really strong leader, perhaps with some sort of magical item.
I mean, have you considered
a king, a witch, even?
Yeah.
Why not both? Maybe that was his pitch. Came up there and said, "Hey, people."
It is also interesting that we don't really know exactly what the magic of the Witch King's Ring of Power is. And that's fine. I don't need it, but I am curious.
Yeah. What can he? How does he get? What makes him a witch?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Is it that he wears the same as a duck?
It's all clear to me now. Thank you.
I mean, he's pretty spectral. He might.
He might. Yes, he might.
He's pretty insubstantial. He could definitely weigh the same.
Yeah.
As
Was there
certain
a
kind
point
of
at which he weighed the same as a duck? Like, and as he was fading, he lost enough mass.
He had himself weighed every single day, and we finally hit the duck thing. He was like, "I'm the Witch King, bitches," and like.
He posting the transformation on YouTube.
I was like, day 1
My
of wearing
journey.
the ring, day 2 of wearing the ring, day 500 of wearing the ring.
God,
Maybe you start thinking about comparing Corbane to swallows here. Let's not go completely down that road.
I would never do that. I don't actually. This is sacrilege. I don't even actually like that movie.
Well, we'll talk about that later.
I know.
I'll
be chastised off.
You terrible person. But yeah, I mean, actually, this is one of the things too that I think is very interesting is that the Witch King of Angmar, besides being Lord of the Nazgûl, again, he is, and this fits in thematically with Tolkien. We don't know who it is. We don't know who this person is. We don't know if this person was originally from that area. We don't know if this person, ended up there on specific command because you're sort of like, try something new. We don't know. And that, of course, is part of, it's Tolkien's, thematic, really, point thing. It's sort of like, you're someone who was a particularly powerful person brought in. Maybe in these terms, he's meant to be some kind of dark power that was already there. Oh, God. It suddenly made me think that Ciarán Hinds' character is going to become the Lord of the Nazgûl in Rings of Power at some point, because I could see that happening. I hope not. Hope not. But suddenly I'm terrified.
I like that blankness. And maybe you were about to say this, I don't know, but it really illuminates part of his vision of evil as something that kind of erases what you are.
Mm-hmm.
Like the longer you hold a ring, the more wraith-like you become. You're under the dominion of somebody else's will. Like evil is in part just losing anything that makes you you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So the fact that we don't know his name or anything about him is like, and I know, isn't there like one ring wraith, and maybe it's him who maybe has a name that we know of.
Yeah.
But that's it.
That's
and we don't even really know much about that guy.
Right.
So it's.
It's Kamul the Black Easterling. It's supposed to be
that guy. Yeah.
Supposed to be second in command, and that's something that comes up in the Unfinished Tales. But that's all. Again, that's all we know about him, whatever his deal is.
Yeah.
And we don't know about anything else. Again, fanfic is illustrative in this regard. We have people sort of like, oh, it's like a Lord of Númenor who fell, like second in line to the kingdom or something like that. And I'm like, sure, okay, yeah.
Why not?
That's
fine.
could be done.
Somebody has definitely written the fic that Sauron somehow got Ar-Pharazôn out of the...
Yeah, I can see
And
that.
made him
And they were lovers.
Well, that's a given. We all know that.
Great. Who is their
Evil.
Millicent? That's what I want to know.
Of course, the evil gays. Happy Pride, everyone.
Again.
Well, but that's also we have Frodo and Sam to balance it out.
That's true.
Exactly.
There are evil gays.
I support
forever.
gay wrongs.
I think we have an episode title. Perfect. Let's see, but maybe start bringing this to some sort of conclusion. The thing too about Arnor and Angmar is, again, and I touched on this briefly when I was introducing the topic at the end of the last episode, is that these, of course, are not the only lost realms and things like this. In fact, famously, we go near another one in Fellowship. We go near Eregion, which is also lost, and we have Legolas is talking about the laments of the stones. They're gone. They left. This lost realm there. We pass by fortifications that were fortifications at one point that are no longer held by Gondor or by anybody. And we can extend this back to, and the story of the Silmarillion is essentially the lost one realm lost after another. We have the part where Tuor, just a guy, coming down to Neverest, and there's nothing there. Vinyamar is empty. There's just sort of like, what was here? Nothing is here now. It's something that Tolkien has a certain fascination for this absence, loss, the things after they've fallen or were abandoned or are no longer around. It's hard to put a pin in it and saying what he's trying to talk about, but it's more like a resonant element that he has a particular strength for describing, I would say. I would say it's something that he is aware of history's layers in this regard, and he doesn't seem to see anything as truly permanent, which I think is just really, really interesting. I mean, he dispatches half a continent when, Morgoth is finally captured and thrown out and Beleriand is crushed. I mean, and Númenor is completely wiped from the face of the earth. I mean, loss, the loss and absence, and just sort of remnants and relics and things like this. In some cases, the land itself is gone, and I think that it's just fascinating to think about. Really, I mean, I don't know if you have any other final thoughts you want to add to that, or anything else you want to bring up.
Yeah, that sense of this is gone, and I can never truly understand what it was is really tantalizing to me.
I think it also. I think you could see it as, I don't know if this is intentional, but in a way, what am I trying to say? Seeing the way the elves see in a way, where it's you want this thing to have stuck around so that you can understand it. So in a way, you're experiencing the temptation of the elves to stop time so that they don't have to keep seeing loss. Again, I don't feel like that's not the intent, but I think it's possible to read it as something like that. Assuming I articulated that the way I meant to. I don't know.
I absolutely.
The last couple of days.
Absolutely.
Yep, I will agree with that. So, and that seems like a good place to wrap it up. Okay, it's time to look ahead to the next episode. The choice of topic comes around to Oriana. What are we talking about next time?
We're going to talk about greedy creatures that hoard things and cause untold damage. Let's talk about dragons.
Yeah.
Tolkien and his dragons. Because we've talked about a few of them, as part, as they've come up in the literature. But let's zoom out a bit and just talk dragons.
All right, yeah, and there are plenty to talk about and plenty of historical antecedents too. So then things like this, you can't go wrong with a good dragon. So excellent. So boy, this will make me think of was it dragon? I'm trying to think of the first time I was consciously aware of dragons, but we can maybe say that for the next episode. Yeah. So in general, beyond Smog, I wonder if there's something else. But yeah, no, great topic, that's for sure. All right, so we'll be talking about that next time. So in the meantime, everyone, thank you very much again for listening. We absolutely appreciate it. We always do. And just to go over where you can find us, again, we are at megaphonic.fm/By-The-Bywater is our homepage. Our episode guide is there. By-The-Bywater is on Blue Sky, and we are all there individually, as well as in various other social media spots. Feel free to follow us, and you can always mail us at bythebywater@gmail.com. That'll get you right where you need to be. And of course, if you would join the Megaphonic Patreon, we would love it. Small cost helps keep the servers going and support the entire network, and you can join us there where we do talk about Tolkien, but all of us there who are hosts and doing things talk about all sorts of things, and we'd love to have you on board. It would just be fun, so please consider it as always. Thanks again for listening. We appreciate it very much, and we will talk to you next time. Until then.